The transport pod screamed through the atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing cherry red from the heat of re-entry. Inside, Marcus Chen pressed his face against the small porthole, watching the alien world rush up to meet him. The crimson sky stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by massive spires of black rock that pierced the clouds like ancient spears. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Commander Vex, a tall alien with silver skin and too many eyes. His laugh sounded like grinding metal. The locals call it Pyros, we call it the Dragon's Den. Marcus said nothing. The restraints cut into his wrists, and the sedative they'd pumped into his system made everything feel distant and dreamlike. But his mind was sharp. It had to be. Survival depended on it. The pod shuddered violently as retro thrusters fired. Through the porthole, Marcus could see their destination. A massive crater carved into the planet's surface, its walls lined with caves that looked like gaping mouths. Steam rose from pools of molten rock scattered across the crater floor. The Dominion has a simple philosophy, Commander Vex continued, adjusting his ceremonial armor. We don't execute criminals. We give them a chance. His multiple eyes focused on Marcus with predatory interest. A very small chance. The transport touched down with a bone-jarring impact. Marcus felt his stomach lurch as artificial gravity fluctuated. Through the walls he could hear something that made his blood freeze. A sound like thunder but deeper, more alive. Roaring. Ah, they know we're here. Vex smiled, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The dragons of Pyros are magnificent creatures. 20 feet tall, armored scales harder than titanium, breath that can melt steel. They've killed every criminal we've dropped here for the past 5 years. Marcus looked at the commander with steady eyes. Everyone? Every single one. Pirates, murderers, terrorists, war criminals. Vex's smile widened. Though I admit, you're our first human. We're curious to see how long you'll last. The pod's door hissed open and waves of superheated air rolled in. The smell hit Marcus immediately. Sulfur, ash, and something else. Something organic and predatory that spoke to the most primitive parts of his brain. 2 guards in environmental suits grabbed Marcus by the arms and hauled him to his feet. His legs were still weak from the sedative, but he forced himself to stand straight. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him stumble. Wait. Commander Vex held up a hand. I'm curious about something. He leaned close to Marcus, studying his face. Your ship's crew betrayed you, sold you to us for the bounty on your head. Don't you want to know why? Marcus met his gaze without flinching. I know why. Oh? Vex's eyebrows, all 4 of them, raised in surprise. Enlighten me. Because they were smart. Marcus's voice was quiet, almost conversational. They knew what I am. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across the commander's face. Then he laughed, the sound echoing off the crater walls. And what exactly are you, Marcus Chen of Earth? Marcus stepped forward and somehow the guards let him. Something in his posture, his movement, made them unconsciously step back. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the very air. I'm the thing that makes monsters check under their beds. The roaring from the caves grew louder, closer. Through the heat, shimmer rising from the crater floor, shapes began to emerge from the darkness. Massive forms with scales that gleamed like obsidian and eyes that burned like tiny suns. Commander Vex's laugh died in his throat. Get him out of here, he ordered his guards. Now. They pushed Marcus toward the pod's exit, but he walked under his own power. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at the commander one last time. You should have listened to my crew, he said softly. They tried to warn you. Then he stepped out into the dragon's domain, and the pod door slammed shut behind him. The heat hit him like a physical blow. Even through the environmental suit they'd given him, Marcus could feel the furnace-like temperature of Pyros. The ground beneath his feet was a mixture of ash and volcanic glass that crunched with each step. Above him, the transport pod's engines roared to life. Marcus didn't look up as it lifted off, carrying Commander Vex and his guards back to the safety of their ship. He had more pressing concerns. 3 dragons emerged from the caves simultaneously, their movements fluid despite their massive size. They were even larger than Vex had described, closer to 30 feet long with wingspans that could eclipse a shuttle. Their scales weren't just black. They held an inner fire that made them glow like coals in a forge. The largest dragon, its hide scarred from countless battles, approached with deliberate slowness. Its head was the size of a small vehicle, and when it opened its mouth, Marcus could see rows of teeth like obsidian daggers. Steam rose from its nostrils with each breath. Marcus stood perfectly still in the center of the crater, hands at his sides. The 3 dragons formed a triangle around him, cutting off any escape route. Not that there was anywhere to run on this hellish world. The scarred dragon lowered its massive head until it was only feet from Marcus. Its eyes were intelligent, ancient, filled with the wisdom of apex predators. When it spoke, its voice was like an avalanche given form, another offering from the skycrawlers. It rumbled in perfect standard Galactic. "How long do you think you'll entertain us, little morsel?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying the dragon's face. "That depends," he said calmly. "How long? Have you been trapped down here?" The dragon's eyes narrowed. "Trapped? We are the lords of Pyros. We choose to remain." "Really?" Marcus took a step forward, and all 3 dragons tensed. "Then why haven't you left? Surely creatures of your magnificence could find a way off this rock if you wanted to." The second dragon, slightly smaller, but no less intimidating, let out a snort of superheated air. "The Skycrawler's ships have weapons, energy shields. We cannot reach them." "Ah." Marcus nodded slowly. "So you are trapped. Prisoners, just like the criminals they dropped down here." He paused, letting that sink in. "Tell me, how many times have they used you? How many executions have you carried out for your captors?" The scarred dragon's rumble deepened into something dangerous. "Choose your words carefully, Softskin. We do not serve the Dominion. We hunt because it amuses us." "Of course you do." Marcus's voice carried just a hint of mockery. "And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that they probably haven't fed you anything else in years. No, I bet the only nutrition you get comes from the criminals they drop. Convenient, isn't it? They get clean executions, and you get just enough food to stay alive and angry." The third dragon, the youngest by the look of it, shifted restlessly. "This one talks too much, Thane. Can we eat him now?" The scarred dragon, Thane, raised a clawed hand for silence. His ancient eyes never left Marcus's face. "You speak as if you understand our situation, human, but you know nothing of what we are." "I know you're dying," Marcus said simply. The temperature in the crater seemed to drop several degrees. All 3 dragons went completely still. "Look at yourselves," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "You're magnificent creatures, but you're withering away. When was the last time you flew free? When did you last hunt by choice instead of necessity? The Dominion has turned you into their attack dogs, and you're so hungry you don't even realize it." Thane's roar shook the crater walls, sending avalanches of ash cascading from the heights. "Silence!" But Marcus didn't flinch. He took another step forward, closing the distance between himself and 30 feet of furious dragon. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? You're not lords of anything. You're tools, weapons. And when you're no longer useful, they'll find a way to dispose of you too." "Enough." The youngest dragon lunged forward, jaws gaping wide enough to swallow Marcus whole. Marcus moved. The dragon's attack was lightning fast, but Marcus was faster. He rolled aside at the last possible second, coming up in a crouch as the dragon's teeth snapped shut on empty air. Before the creature could recover, Marcus was moving again, staying just ahead of claws and fangs that could have torn him apart. "Impressive reflexes," Thane observed, making no move to help his younger companion. "But you cannot run forever." "I'm not running," Marcus called back, dodging another strike. "I'm thinking." The second dragon joined the attack, breathing a stream of superheated plasma that turned the sand to glass where Marcus had been standing. He rolled, came up running, and vaulted over a ridge of volcanic rock, just as the molten breath scorched the air behind him. Thinking about what? Thane demanded, his voice echoing off the crater walls. Marcus emerged from behind the rocks, no longer running. Instead, he walked calmly toward the center of the crater, where pools of lava bubbled and hissed. The other, two dragons flanked him, ready to strike, but something in his posture made them hesitate. "I'm thinking about leverage," Marcus said. He reached into his environmental suit and pulled out a small device, something he'd hidden before the guards had searched him. It looked innocuous enough, just a palm-sized rectangle of metal and circuitry. Thane's eyes focused on the device with sudden intensity. "What is that?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time since arriving on Pyros, it wasn't a pleasant expression. This is a quantum resonance transmitter. Military grade. Do you know what that means?" The dragons exchanged glances. The youngest spoke up, uncertainty clear in his voice. "Should we?" "It means," Marcus continued, his thumb hovering over a button on the device, "that I can broadcast a signal through subspace that will reach every major communication network in this sector, including the networks used by the Rebellion." Thane's massive head tilted. "The Rebellion? The group that's been fighting the Dominion for the past decade. The ones who've been looking for ways to strike back at their enemies." Marcus's smile grew wider, more predatory. "The ones who would be very, very interested to learn that the Dominion has been keeping 3 magnificent dragons prisoner on a backwater world." The crater fell silent except for the bubbling of lava and the distant whisper of wind through stone. The dragons stared at Marcus with new understanding dawning in their ancient eyes. "You see," Marcus continued conversationally, "I wasn't just any criminal they caught. I was a rebellion operative, deep cover, working to map Dominion supply lines and identify strategic targets." He gestured at the device in his hand. "This was my emergency beacon, and thanks to Commander Vex's grand tour, I now know exactly where we are and how to signal for help." Thane lowered his great head until he was eye level with Marcus. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than threatening. "And what would you want in return for using this device?" "Partnership," Marcus said without hesitation. "The Rebellion could use allies like you, and you could use a way off this rock. The Dominion ships have shields," the second dragon pointed out. "We cannot reach them." "You can't," Marcus agreed, "but a Rebellion strike force could, especially if they had inside information about Dominion operations on Pyros." He looked at each dragon in turn. "How long have you been observing their patterns, their schedules, their weaknesses?" The youngest dragon's eyes began to glow with something that might have been hope. 5 years, he whispered. 5 years of watching their ships come and go. "Then you know everything we need to know to hit them where it hurts." Marcus raised the transmitter. "The question is, are you ready to stop being their prisoners and start being their nightmare?" Thane was silent for a long moment, considering. Around them, the crater seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the ancient dragon's lips pulled back, in what might have been a smile revealing those obsidian fangs. "Do it," he rumbled. "Send your signal, Marcus Chen of Earth." Marcus pressed the button. The transmitter emitted a high-pitched whine that seemed to cut through the very fabric of space. Above them, the crimson sky shimmered as the quantum signal tore through subspace, carrying its message across the stars. Then the device went dark, its power exhausted. "How long?" Thane asked. Marcus pocketed the dead transmitter and looked up at the alien sky. "If I'm right about our location, 48 hours. Maybe less." "And if you're wrong?" Marcus's smile returned, cold and dangerous. "Then we'll have to find another way to make the Dominion regret dropping me in here with you." Thane's rumbling laugh shook dust from the crater walls. "I begin to understand why your crew betrayed you, human. You are indeed a dangerous creature. You have no idea," Marcus said softly. Above them, unseen and unaware, Commander Vex's ship continued its patrol of the Pyros system, confident that they had disposed of another criminal. They had no way of knowing that they had just made the greatest mistake in Dominion history. The real monster had been released, and he wasn't the one with scales and fangs. Chapter 2. The Alliance. 18 hours after the signal was sent, Marcus Chen sat cross-legged on a ledge overlooking the crater floor, watching Thane teach the younger dragons a brutal form of aerial combat. The ancient dragon moved with grace that belied his massive size, his wings cutting through the superheated air like obsidian blades. "Again, Scar," Thane commanded as the youngest dragon attempted a diving strike. "You telegraph your approach. An enemy gunship will see you coming from miles away." Scar, Marcus had learned the young dragon's name during the long hours of waiting, pulled up from his dive with frustrated wing beats. "The air is too thin here. I cannot build proper speed." "Then you adapt," Thane replied without sympathy. "Vox, demonstrate." The second dragon, Vox, launched himself from a standing position with explosive force. Instead of climbing for altitude, he stayed low, using the crater's rocky spires as cover. His approach was nearly silent, his massive form somehow slipping between shadows cast by the towering stones. "Better," Thane acknowledged, "but still too predictable." "Marcus, what do you think?" Marcus looked up from the piece of volcanic glass he'd been shaping into a crude blade. "I think you're preparing for the wrong kind of fight." All three dragons turned their attention to him. Thane's head tilted in curiosity. "Explain." "You're thinking like predators," Marcus said, standing and walking to the edge of the ledge. "Apex hunters who've never had to worry about organized resistance. But the Dominion isn't prey. They're soldiers. They think tactically, strategically. They have contingency plans and backup systems." He gestured toward the crater's rim, where the mouth of the largest cave yawned like a gateway to hell. "They've kept you contained here for 5 years. Do you really think they don't have countermeasures in place if you ever tried to escape?" Vox bristled, steam rising from his nostrils. "We are not helpless hatchlings, human. We have observed their patterns, learned their weaknesses." "Have you?" Marcus's voice carried a challenging edge. "Then tell me, why do their ships always approach from the eastern vector? Why do they never vary their landing pattern? And why do their patrols follow exactly the same route every single time?" The dragons exchanged uncertain glances. Scar spoke up hesitantly. "Because they are creatures of habit?" Marcus shook his head. "Because they want you to think their patterns are predictable. Every weakness you've observed has been carefully crafted to give you false confidence." He pointed at the sky where the distant outline of a Dominion patrol ship was barely visible against the crimson clouds. "They're not sloppy. They're smart. And they're expecting you to eventually try exactly what you're planning." Thane's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You suggest we are fools?" "I suggest you're thinking like dragons instead of insurgents." Marcus hopped down from the ledge, landing with surprising grace on the crater floor. "The rebellion didn't survive this long by charging into fights we couldn't win. We survived by making our enemies come to us on our terms." "And how do you propose we do that?" Vox demanded. Marcus smiled that cold, predatory smile that was becoming familiar. "By giving them exactly what they expect, right up until the moment we don't." He walked to the center of the crater where the largest lava pool bubbled and hissed. The heat should have been unbearable, but Marcus moved as if he didn't even notice it. "They expect you to eventually try to escape. They're prepared for a direct assault on their ships, but they're not prepared for you to disappear entirely." "Disappear?" Scar's voice was confused. "We are not exactly inconspicuous." "No, but you're also not the only things moving on this planet." Marcus knelt by the lava pool and began drawing in the ash with the glass blade he'd made. "Pyros has an ecosystem, doesn't it? Other creatures, other life forms." Thane's rumble held a note of understanding. "The thermal worms in the deep caves, the crystal spiders in the eastern canyons, the shadow birds that nest in the highest spires." "Exactly." Marcus's drawing began to take shape, a crude but effective map of the crater and surrounding terrain. "The Dominion monitors you specifically, because you're the obvious threat. But how closely do they watch the rest of the local wildlife?" Vox let out a snort of superheated air. "You cannot seriously suggest we disguise ourselves as worms and spiders." "Not disguise," Marcus corrected. "Distraction." He stood and faced the three dragons, his human form dwarfed by their massive size but somehow commanding their attention completely. "How long can you hold your breath?" Our internal fires burn continuously, Thane said slowly. We do not breathe, as you understand it. But you can suppress your thermal signature. For short periods, it is uncomfortable. Marcus nodded. The thermal worms create heat blooms when they surface to feed. If you time it right, you could move through the underground tunnel system without being detected by orbital sensors. To what end? Vox demanded. The tunnels lead, nowhere except deeper into the planet's core. The tunnels lead everywhere, Marcus corrected, including under the Dominion's primary monitoring station. The crater fell silent except for the bubbling of lava. The dragons stared at Marcus with new respect dawning in their ancient eyes. Thane was the first to speak. The monitoring station controls the planetary defense grid, the weapon satellites that keep us trapped here. Among other things, Marcus agreed. It also coordinates patrol schedules, manages communication relays, and stores detailed intelligence about rebellion activities in this sector. His smile turned predatory. Intelligence that would be very valuable to my contacts. You want us to attack the station? Scar asked. I want you to capture it, Marcus corrected. Intact, with all personnel alive and all data systems functional. Vox's laugh was like the roar of a furnace. Impossible. The station is heavily fortified and our very presence would trigger every alarm in the system. Your presence would, Marcus agreed, but mine wouldn't. He walked to the edge of the crater and looked up at the rocky walls that surrounded them. Somewhere up there, hidden among the spires and canyons, the Dominion monitoring station maintained its silent vigil over Pyros. I need to get inside that facility, he continued, and you need to be in position to take control when I give the signal. But first, we need to make the Dominion believe their plan is working perfectly. Thane's massive head lowered until he was eye level with Marcus. What plan? The one where you finally break, Marcus said simply, where 5 years of imprisonment and starvation finally drive you to desperate action, where you make a foolish, doomed attack on their ships that gives them the excuse they need to eliminate you permanently. Understanding dawned in the dragon's ancient eyes. A feint. We stage an escape attempt, draw their attention, while I infiltrate the monitoring station during the chaos. Marcus nodded. But it has to be convincing. They need to believe you finally snapped, that you're acting out of desperation instead of strategy. And if something goes wrong? Vox asked quietly. If we are captured or killed during this feint? Marcus met his gaze steadily. Then I complete the mission alone, and your sacrifice brings freedom to Pyros and intelligence to the rebellion. You speak of our deaths very casually for someone asking us to trust him, Scar observed. I speak of them realistically, Marcus corrected, because that's what soldiers do. We accept the risks and focus on the mission. He looked at each dragon in turn. But I don't intend for any of us to die today. The rebellion taught me that the best operations are the ones where everyone goes home. Thane was quiet for a long moment, his ancient mind weighing options and probabilities. Finally, he spoke. When do we begin? Now, Marcus said. Because according to my calculations, we have about 6 hours before my signal reaches Rebellion Command, and they start moving assets into position. We need to have control of the monitoring station before then, or the entire operation fails. 6 hours to plan and execute an assault on the most heavily defended installation on Pyros, Vox mused. Ambitious. Ambitious is what keeps you alive in this business, Marcus replied. He began walking toward the crater's edge, where a narrow path wound up the rocky wall. Time to go to work. As the 4 unlikely allies began their ascent from the dragon's prison, none of them noticed the small surveillance drone that detached itself from the crater's rim and began following at a discreet distance. Commander Vex had not survived this long in the Dominion military by leaving anything to chance. The trap was already in motion, and Marcus Chen was walking directly into it. Chapter 3. The hunt, the Dominion monitoring station clung to the side of Mountain Furnace like a metallic parasite, its sensor arrays and communication dishes jutting out from the volcanic rock like mechanical growths. From Marcus's position in the shadowed canyon below, it looked impregnable. Armored walls, energy barriers, automated defense turrets that tracked anything larger than a pebble. 14 guards, he whispered into the crude comm unit Thane had fashioned from salvaged metal. 2 at the main entrance, 4 on patrol, 8 manning the internal stations. Standard rotation every 6 hours. Thane's voice crackled back through the device, distorted by the volcanic interference but still understandable. We are in position. The thermal tunnels run directly beneath the facility's primary power coupling. Remember, Marcus said, checking his improvised climbing gear one final time. You don't move until I give the signal. If this goes wrong, it will not go wrong, Vox interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. We have hunted for millennia, human. We know patience. Marcus smiled despite himself. In the past 6 hours, he'd gained a new respect for the 3 dragons. They moved through the underground tunnel system with surprising stealth, their massive forms somehow finding pathways through spaces that seemed impossibly narrow. More importantly, they listened. They adapted. They learned. They were going to make excellent insurgents. Signal in 30 minutes, Marcus said, securing the comm unit to his belt. Remember, make it look real, but don't get yourselves killed. We'll only get one shot at this. He clicked off the comm and began his ascent, up the sheer face of Mount Infernus. The volcanic rock was treacherous, crumbling away under his hands and feet. But Marcus climbed with the steady rhythm of someone who'd scaled everything from Martian cliff faces to the glass towers of New Geneva. The environmental suit helped, its micro-servos providing just enough assistance to keep him moving upward through the killing heat. 20 feet below the monitoring station's lowest sensor array, Marcus paused and checked his chronometer. 28 minutes since the last transmission. Right on schedule. He pulled out a small device that looked like a metallic spider, a rebellion jamming unit designed to interfere with security systems. Finding the station's primary sensor, cluster, he attached the device and activated it. For the next 5 minutes, there would be a small blind spot in the Dominion surveillance net. More than enough time for what came next. Marcus finished his climb in silence, slipping over the station's outer wall like a ghost. The facility's layout matched the intelligence he'd memorized during his imprisonment. Central command center, barracks, communication array, and power plant, all connected by a network of corridors carved directly into the mountain stone. 2. Guards patrolled the outer perimeter, their attention focused outward toward the canyon below. They never looked up. Marcus dropped down behind them like a shadow, his movements precise and economical. The first guard went down silently, a nerve strike dropping him instantly into unconsciousness. The second turned at the sound of his partner's body hitting the ground, but Marcus was already moving. Another nerve strike and the perimeter was clear. He dragged both bodies into a storage alcove and checked their equipment. Standard Dominion military gear, pulse rifles, comm units, stunners. Nothing he couldn't handle, but nothing that would help him either. He left the weapons where they were and continued deeper into the facility. The interior corridors were dimly lit, illuminated by the red glow of emergency lighting that gave everything a hellish cast. Marcus moved through them like he belonged there, his confidence and bearing convincing anyone who glimpsed him that he was just another guard making his rounds. The central command center was his target, a circular room at the heart of the facility where banks of monitors displayed everything happening on Pyros and in the surrounding space. 4 technicians sat at control stations, their attention focused on their screens. A single officer supervised from a raised platform in the center of the room. Marcus checked his chronometer again. 3 minutes until the signal. He keyed his comm unit, the transmission brief encoded. Package delivered. Initiating delivery sequence. 30 seconds later, Mount Infernus shook. The explosion came from deep underground, where Thane had positioned himself directly beneath the station's power coupling. The lights flickered, emergency alarms began wailing, and every screen in the command center flashed red warnings. What the hell was that? The supervising officer demanded. Seismic activity, one of the technicians reported, his fingers flying over his controls. Massive thermal bloom from the underground system. It's off the charts. The dragons, another technician breathed. Sir, they're moving, all three of them, coming up through the thermal vents. On the main display screen, thermal imaging showed 3 massive signatures rising through the volcanic tunnels like demons ascending from hell. They moved with purpose, heading directly for the surface installations where the Dominion's patrol ships were docked. Red alert, the officer commanded. All ships to intercept. Authorization Omega 77. Marcus smiled and stepped into the command center. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, he said conversationally. 5 heads turned toward him in surprise. The officer's hand dropped to his sidearm, but Marcus was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, his movements fluid and precise. The officer's weapon never cleared its holster. Pressure point strike to the neck and the supervisor collapsed. Marcus caught him before he hit the ground and gently lowered him to the floor. The 4 technicians stared in shock, their hands frozen over their controls. Please keep your hands where I can see them, Marcus said politely. I'd rather not hurt anyone else. You're the human, one of the technicians whispered, the one they dropped in the crater. Marcus Chen, Rebellion Intelligence, Marcus confirmed. And you are? T. Technician Rail, the alien stammered. Please. We're just support staff. We don't even carry weapons. I know. Marcus moved to the central command console, his eyes scanning the displays. Which is why you're all going to help me save your lives. On the main screen, the dragons had reached the surface. Thane emerged from a thermal vent like a living avalanche, his massive form silhouetted against the red sky. Vox and Scar flanked him, their wings spread wide in challenge. 3 Dominion patrol ships moved to intercept, their weapons charging, with deadly light. Sir? Another technician called out, his voice shaking. The dragons. They're not attacking the ships. They're just waiting. Marcus glanced at the screen and felt a surge of pride. The dragons were holding position exactly, as planned, close enough to seem threatening but far enough away to avoid the ship's weapons. They were drawing attention, creating a spectacle, giving him the distraction he needed. Technician Rail, Marcus said, his voice calm and reasonable. I need you to access the planetary defense grid. I can't do that. It requires command authorization. Marcus held up a small device, a data spike loaded with rebellion hacking programs. This will provide the authorization. All you have to do is plug it in and follow the prompts. They'll court-martial me, Rail protested. Only if you survive the next 5 minutes, Marcus pointed out, which depends entirely on how quickly you follow my instructions. The technician's hands shook as he took the data spike and inserted it into his console. Lines of code began scrolling across his screen, Rebellion program systematically dismantling Dominion security protocols. Outside, the standoff continued. The patrol ships had formed a defensive perimeter around the dragons, their weapons trained, but not firing. On the comm channels, Marcus could hear the ship commanders requesting orders from the monitoring station, orders that would never come. Access granted, Rail reported, his voice barely a whisper. I have control of the defense grid. Excellent. Marcus moved to stand behind the technician's chair. Now, I want you to target the patrol ships. Lock weapons on all 3 vessels. What? Rail's eyes went wide. Sir, those are Dominion ships. I can't. You can, Marcus said firmly, and you will. Because right now, the only thing standing between you and a very unpleasant death is my good humor. The technician's fingers moved reluctantly over his controls. On the main screen, targeting reticles appeared around each patrol ship. The vessel's commanders immediately began broadcasting surrender signals, but Marcus ignored them. Fire, he commanded. Sir, please, fire. 3 beams of coherent energy lanced down from the orbital defense platforms. The patrol ship's shields flared and died under the assault, leaving them dead in space but intact. Marcus had been careful to calibrate the weapons for disable rather than destroy. Now, he continued, signal the dragons to return to the crater. Tell them the threat has been neutralized. Rail complied, his face pale with shock. On the screen, Thane acknowledged the signal with what might have been a nod before leading Vox and Scar back into the thermal vents. "Excellent work," Marcus said. He moved to the central command console and began downloading files, patrol schedules, security protocols, intelligence reports, everything the rebellion would need to plan their next moves in this sector. "What happens to us?" one of the other technicians asked quietly. Marcus looked up from his work. "That depends on how cooperative you continue to be. The rebellion doesn't make war on support staff, but we also can't afford to leave loose ends." His chronometer chimed softly. The data download was complete, and the first rebellion ships should be dropping out of hyperspace within the hour. Phase 1 of the operation was finished. But as Marcus prepared to signal the dragons for extraction, a new alarm began sounding throughout the facility. This one was different, deeper, more urgent. "What is that?" he demanded. Technician Rails' face had gone from pale to ashen. "Incoming transmission," he whispered. "Command frequency. It's Commander Vex." On the main screen, the familiar face of the Dominion officer appeared. His multiple eyes held a cold satisfaction that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Hello, Marcus Chen," Vex said pleasantly. "Did you really think we didn't know about your little rebellion contact device? We've been monitoring your transmission since the moment you activated it." Marcus felt the trap closing around him like a steel cage. "Vex. Surprised? You shouldn't be. The Dominion has been hunting rebellion operatives for years. We know all about your quantum transmitters, your emergency protocols, your extraction procedures." Vex's smile was predatory. "In fact, we've been waiting for someone exactly like you to fall into our hands." On the tactical display, new contacts began appearing at the edge of the system. Not rebellion ships, Dominion reinforcements. A full battle fleet, moving to intercept any rescue attempt. "You used me," Marcus realized. "The whole thing. Dropping me with the dragons, letting me think I could escape, it was all bait." "Very good. Yes, we used you to draw out your rebellion friends. And now we'll use them to find the location of your base." Vex leaned forward, his multiple eyes gleaming. "Did you really think 3 dragons could challenge the might of the Dominion Empire?" Before Marcus could respond, the mountain shook again, but this time the tremor came from above. Through the command center's reinforced windows, Marcus could see something that made his heart stop. Descending through the crimson sky like metallic angels of death were dozens of Dominion dropships, their hulls bristling with weapons and troop compartments, but that wasn't what made Marcus smile. "Commander Vex," he said, his voice carrying across the comm channel with dangerous calm. "You made one critical error in your planning." Vex's confident expression flickered slightly. "And what would that be?" "You assumed I was the monster they threw in with the dragons." Marcus walked to the command center's main window, looking out at the approaching dropships. "But you never asked what I did before I joined the rebellion." "Enlighten me," Vex said, though uncertainty was creeping into his voice. Marcus pressed his hand against the reinforced glass, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I was a xenobiologist, Commander, specializing in apex predators and their behavioral patterns." His smile grew wider, more predatory. "Do you know what happens when you take 3 ancient, intelligent dragons and give them a common enemy?" The first dropship exploded in midair. Thane erupted from the thermal vent like a living missile, his massive form slamming into the troop transport with devastating force. The ship's armor crumpled like paper under his claws, and its fuel cells detonated in a brilliant fireball that lit up the sky. "Impossible," Vex breathed. "The thermal scanners showed them returning to the crater." "Showed you what we wanted you to see," Marcus interrupted. "Did you really think creatures that have survived for millennia would be fooled by your surveillance technology?" Vox appeared next, rising from a concealed position among the mountain's rocky spires. His wings spread wide as he breathed a stream of superheated plasma that cut through 2 more dropships like a sword through silk. The vessels spun out of control, their crews screaming over the comm channels as they plummeted toward the volcanic surface below. "The thermal signatures," one of the technicians started to say, were fake, Marcus confirmed. Crystal formations heated to dragon-level temperatures and positioned in the thermal vents. Simple misdirection, but effective against sensors that rely too heavily on heat detection. Scar completed the triangle, emerging from a cave system that Marcus had identified during their reconnaissance. The young dragon had grown into his power during the past few hours, and his attack was a thing of terrible beauty. He dove at the remaining dropships like a meteor, his claws raking across their hulls and sending them tumbling from the sky in pieces. In less than 60 seconds, an entire airborne assault force had been reduced to burning wreckage scattered across the mountainside. But how? Vex demanded, his voice shaking with rage and disbelief. The dragons were contained. 5 years of perfect containment. Marcus turned away from the window and faced the technicians, who were staring at him, with expressions of awe and terror. That's the thing about apex predators, Commander. Containment only works as long as they believe it's in their best interest to stay contained. He moved to the central command console and began entering new commands. Technician Rail, I need you to open a channel to all Dominion forces in this system. Sir, Do it. Rail's hands moved over his controls with practiced efficiency. Channel open, sir. Marcus leaned forward to speak into the comm pickup, his voice carrying clearly across every Dominion frequency in the Pyros system. Attention all Dominion vessels and installations. This is Marcus Chen, Rebellion Intelligence, speaking from your monitoring station. In approximately 30 minutes, a Rebellion strike force will arrive in this system. You have two choices. Here, paused, letting that sink in before continuing. You can surrender now and be treated according to the Galactic Conventions on the treatment of prisoners of war. Or you can resist and discover why the Dominion classified dragons as Class X hostile entities. Through the command center's windows, the 3 dragons were visible against the red sky, circling the mountain like ancient gods of war. Their roars echoed off the canyon walls, a sound that spoke to the deepest, most primitive fears hardwired into every sentient species. Choose quickly, Marcus concluded. The dragons are getting hungry. The response was immediate. Across the system, Dominion ships began powering down their weapons and broadcasting surrender codes. The battle fleet that Vex had assembled to trap the rebellion found itself facing a choice between capitulation and extinction. Most chose wisely. This isn't over, Vex snarled over the comm. The Dominion will never... Commander, Marcus interrupted gently. Look at your tactical display. On screens throughout the system, new contacts were appearing at the edge of sensor range. But these weren't the rebellion ships Vex had been expecting. These were bigger, faster, and bore the distinctive energy signatures of advanced alien technology. Dragons, one of Vex's bridge officers reported, his voice barely a whisper. Sir, those are dragon ships, dozens of them. Marcus smiled. Did you really think Thane, Vox, and Scar were the only survivors of their species? The Dominion's xenobiologists apparently missed some crucial details in their research. The truth was even more devastating than Vex could have imagined. The dragons of Pyros weren't prisoners, they were scouts. Advance agents for a species that had been watching the galaxy's younger races with ancient, patient eyes. The Dominion's treatment of 3 of their kind had finally provoked them to action. The rebellion didn't send the signal I transmitted. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of terrible revelation. I sent it to the dragon enclaves beyond the rim, species that have been spacefaring since before your ancestors discovered fire. Through the mounting chaos of surrender signals and panicked communications, Vex's voice cut like a blade. What do you want? Marcus looked out at the 3 dragons circling the mountain, then at the technicians who waited for his next command. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of someone who had just reshaped the balance of power in an entire star system. Peace, he said simply. Real peace. Not the Dominion's version of order imposed through fear and violence, but actual cooperation between species. He paused. The dragons are offering humanity a choice, Commander. The same choice I just offered. You. And if we refuse? Marcus's smile was gentle, almost sad. Then you'll discover what it feels like to be the prey instead of the predator. The command center fell silent except for the distant roar of dragons and the crackle of burning wreckage. Outside, the red sky of Pyros was filled with ships, some surrendering, some fleeing, all of them bearing witness to the end of an era. The Dominion's reign of terror was over, and it had ended not with the advanced weapons or superior tactics they understood, but with something far more primitive and far more powerful. It had ended with monsters that were older, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. Marcus Chen looked out at the alien sky and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The real monster had indeed been released on Pyros, but it wasn't him, and it wasn't the dragons. It was the truth. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. 3 days after the fall of Pyros, Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the dragon ship, Eternal Flame, watching through the massive viewport as the Dominion capital world of Hegemonia grew larger against the starfield. The ancient vessel moved through space with a grace that human engineering couldn't match, its biomechanical systems humming with power that had been old when Earth was young. Second thoughts? Thane asked, his massive form somehow fitting comfortably in the bridge's alien architecture. The dragon had adapted to shipboard life with surprising ease, though Marcus suspected the vessel had been designed with beings like him in mind. About which part? Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off the approaching planet. Negotiating with the species that tried to use me as monster food, or trusting dragons I've known for less than a week with the future of human civilization? Thane's rumbling laugh shook the deck plates. When you phrase it like that, it does sound rather foolish. Behind them, Vox was interfacing directly with the ship's navigation systems. His consciousness merged with the vessel's ancient AI in ways that still made Marcus's head spin. Scar monitored communications from a dozen different systems, his young mind proving surprisingly adept at managing the flood of diplomatic messages that had followed the Pyros incident. Status report, Marcus requested. 17 Dominion systems have declared independence in the past 72 hours, Scar reported, his voice carrying notes of satisfaction. The Senate on Hegemonia is in emergency session and there are reports of civil unrest on at least 30 worlds. The rebellion, Marcus asked, consolidating their gains and trying to figure out how to respond to their new allies, Vox answered, his consciousness surfacing from the ship's systems. Admiral Kester sends her compliments and asks when you plan to return to active duty. Marcus smiled at that. Sarah Kester had been his commanding officer for 3 years, and she'd probably spent the past week alternating between relief that he was alive and fury that he'd improvised such a massive operation without clearance. Tell the Admiral that I'm currently on diplomatic assignment, he said, and that she'll have a full report when this is over. If it goes well, Thane observed. It will go well, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. Because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. Through the viewport, Hegemonia's defense grid was becoming visible. Orbital platforms and patrol ships arranged in formations that had protected the Dominion capital for over a century. They should have been intercepting the Eternal Flame, demanding identification, preparing to repel what any reasonable military would consider an invasion force. Instead, they were moving aside. The Dragon Fleet? Marcus asked. Holding position at the system's edge, Thane confirmed. 57 ships of the outer enclaves, with more arriving hourly. The Dominion High Command is attentive to our diplomatic overtures. Marcus nodded. The Dragon Fleet wasn't an invasion force in the traditional sense. It was something far more terrifying. It was a demonstration. A reminder that there were powers in the galaxy that the younger species had forgotten existed, and that those powers were no longer content to watch from the shadows. Incoming transmission, Scar announced. From the Dominion Senate, they're requesting permission to dock at the diplomatic station. Granted, Marcus said. And make sure our arrival is broadcast on all public frequencies. I want every citizen of Hegemonia to see this. The Eternal Flame descended through Hegemonia's atmosphere like a falling star, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with patterns that spoke of intelligence and age beyond human comprehension. At the diplomatic station, a massive orbital platform where the Dominion conducted its most sensitive negotiations. Crowds of officials and media representatives waited with barely concealed terror and fascination. Marcus stood in the docking bay as the ship settled into its berth, wearing the simple black uniform of rebellion intelligence. Beside him, Thane had donned ceremonial armor that turned his already impressive form into something out of legend. Vox and Scar flanked them, their scales polished to mirror brightness, their eyes burning with inner fire. "Remember," Marcus said, quietly, "we're not here to conquer. We're here to offer a choice." "And if they choose unwisely?" Vox asked. Marcus's smile was cold as space. "Then they'll discover that monsters come in many forms." The docking bay doors opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure, and Marcus Chen walked out to meet the representatives of an empire that had ruled through fear for 3 centuries. The Dominion delegation was impressive in its way. A dozen senators in ceremonial robes, flanked by honor guards in powered armor. At their head stood Chancellor Zirian, the ancient alien who had ruled the Dominion for over 50 years. His forearms were spread in a gesture that might have been welcome or might have been preparation for combat. "Marcus Chen of Earth," Zirian said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have caused considerable disruption." "Chancellor Zirian," Marcus replied with a respectful nod. "I prefer to think of it as providing clarity." "Clarity?" One of the senators, a tall, thin alien with too many joints, stepped forward aggressively. "You've destroyed our monitoring station, compromised our security, and incited rebellion across 17 systems." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked past the delegation to the crowds of civilians pressed against the viewing galleries. Humans, Altarians, Centaurians, a dozen other species, all of them watching this moment with expressions of hope and fear. "Senator Crix," Marcus said finally, identifying the speaker from intelligence files he'd memorized years ago. "How many civilians died in the Pyros operation?" Crix's mandibles clicked in confusion. "What?" "It's a simple question. In the operation that resulted in the fall of your monitoring station and the liberation of 3 dragons, how many civilian casualties were recorded?" "That's not relevant." "0. Marcus continued smoothly. 0 civilian deaths. 0 military deaths, for that matter, if you don't count the crews of the dropships that attacked first. He looked at each senator in turn. Compare that to the Dominion's standard response to rebellion. The glassing of Altair 7, the orbital bombardment of the Centaurian colonies, the systematic extermination of the Vegan resistance. Chancellor Zirian raised one hand for silence. "You seek to justify your actions by comparing them to military necessity?" "I seek to demonstrate the difference between justice and vengeance," Marcus replied. "The dragons could have reduced hegemonia to ash before your fleet could have responded. Instead, they sent me. One human with an offer of peace." Thane stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the assembled delegation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of millennia. "The younger races have forgotten much in their haste to claim the stars," he rumbled. "They have forgotten that they are not the first to walk between worlds. They have forgotten that power without wisdom leads to darkness. Most importantly, they have forgotten that even apex predators can become prey." "Is that a threat, Senator?" Crix demanded, though his voice shook slightly. "It is a fact," Thane replied calmly. "The Dominion has spent 3 centuries believing itself the supreme power in this galaxy. But you are children playing with forces you do not understand. The dragons have watched your rise with interest, and your descent into tyranny with growing concern." Chancellor Zarian's 4 eyes focused intently on Marcus. "What do you want?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time since arriving on Hegemonia, it was a genuinely warm expression. "Chancellor, I want what every human wants. I want my species to survive and thrive among the stars. But I also want something the Dominion has never offered, the chance for all species to do the same." He gestured toward the viewing galleries where thousands of beings from across the galaxy watched in breathless silence. "Look at them, Chancellor. Humans, Altarians, Centaurians, vegans, a dozen species that the Dominion has conquered, subjugated, or exploited, but also Dominion citizens, your own people, watching to see whether their government will choose wisdom or pride. The Dominion has brought order to the galaxy, Zerion said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. The Dominion has brought fear, Marcus corrected. Order through intimidation, peace through violence, prosperity through exploitation. He paused, letting his words sink in. But fear is a tool with diminishing returns, Chancellor. Eventually, the oppressed stop being afraid and start getting angry. Vox stepped forward, his scales shimmering with barely contained energy. The Dragon Enclaves have decided that the time for passive observation has ended. We offer the younger races a choice, cooperation, or replacement. You would make war on the entire galaxy? Senator Crix's voice rose to a near shriek. We would make peace, Scar replied, his youthful voice carrying surprising authority. But peace requires willing participants. Those who choose conflict will discover that they are no longer the apex predators they believed themselves to be. Marcus raised his hand, drawing attention back to himself. The rebellion is prepared to offer terms, Chancellor, not terms of surrender, terms of partnership. Explain. Immediate ceasefire across all contested systems, withdrawal of Dominion forces from occupied worlds, transition to a Confederate government with equal representation for all species. Marcus's voice grew stronger with each point. And full amnesty for all military personnel who cooperate with the transition. The delegation erupted in angry voices, senators shouting over each other in a dozen different languages. But Chancellor Zerion remained silent, his ancient eyes studying Marcus with calculating intelligence. And if we refuse? He asked quietly. Marcus looked out at the viewing galleries again, at the faces of beings who had lived their entire lives, under Dominion rule. Then the galaxy learns what dragons look like when they stop pretending to be contained. As if summoned by his words, the lights in the docking bay dimmed. Through the massive viewport that dominated one wall, the Dragon fleet became visible. 57 ships that dwarfed anything in the Dominion Navy, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with power that had been accumulating for millennia. They're beautiful, someone whispered from the viewing gallery. And they were. Each Dragon ship was unique, grown rather than built, shaped by consciousness and will rather than industrial processes. They moved through space like living things, their formations flowing and shifting in patterns that spoke of intelligence beyond human comprehension. The outer enclaves have been patient, Thane said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent docking bay. We have watched the younger races stumble toward maturity, hoping that wisdom would eventually triumph over ambition, but patience has its limits. Chancellor Zerion stared at the Dragon fleet for a long moment, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. How long do we have to decide? Marcus checked his chronometer, a simple gesture that somehow carried enormous weight. The rebellion fleet will arrive in this system in 18 hours, Chancellor. Dragon reinforcements continue to arrive hourly, and across the galaxy, Dominion systems are declaring independence at an accelerating rate. He met the Chancellor's gaze directly. The age of the Dominion is ending, sir. The only question is whether it ends in transformation or destruction. You're asking us to surrender everything we've built, Senator Crix protested. I'm asking you to evolve, Marcus replied, to become partners instead of masters, to choose cooperation over domination. His smile returned, sharp and predatory, because the alternative is to discover what happens when the real monsters come out to play. In the viewing galleries, the crowds had fallen silent. Across Hegemonia, billions of beings watched their screens, waiting to see whether their rulers would choose wisdom or pride. And in the darkness between stars, ancient powers stirred, preparing to reshape a galaxy that had forgotten the meaning of fear. The reckoning had begun. Epilogue: The New Dawn. 1 year later, Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, watching the construction crews put the finishing touches on humanity's first joint orbital habitat. Through the massive, transparent aluminum windows, he could see representatives from 47 different species working together on the project, some in environmental suits, others in mechanical walkers, a few existing as pure energy and interfacing directly with the station's systems. Beautiful sight, Admiral Sarah, Kester observed, joining him at the viewport. Her rebellion uniform had been replaced by the simple gray of the new Galactic Confederation, and her expression held a contentment that Marcus had never seen during their years of fighting the Dominion. "I never thought I'd live to see it," Marcus admitted. Humans and Altarians working side by side, Centaurian engineers collaborating with vegan architects, dragons serving as advisors and mediators. Through the transparent hull, the massive form of Thane was visible, his ancient wisdom helping to resolve a dispute between two construction teams. The dragon had adapted to his new role as easily as he'd adapted to everything else, his patience and intelligence making him invaluable in the delicate work of building a truly multi-species civilization. "The Dominion Senate's final vote comes tomorrow," Admiral Kester noted. "Think they'll make the right choice?" Marcus smiled. "They don't really have a choice, do they? Half their systems have already joined the Confederation, their military is in shambles, and there's a dragon fleet parked in their capital system." He paused, watching a group of human children play with their alien counterparts in the station's central garden. "Chancellor Zarian is many things, but he's not stupid. And if he surprises us, then Vox gets to demonstrate why dragons were feared across the galaxy before the younger races were even spacefaring." Marcus's expression grew serious. "But it won't come to that. The Dominion has seen what cooperation can accomplish. They've seen former enemy species building something beautiful together instead of tearing each other apart." A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Marcus activated his wrist communicator, and Scar's voice filled the air around them. "Marcus, you need to see this. We're receiving signals from the Galactic Rim, long-range deep space probes from the Andromeda Galaxy. They're requesting contact with the dragon enclaves of the Milky Way." Marcus and Admiral Kester exchanged glances. "Andromeda?" she asked quietly. "It appears," Marcus said with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, "that our galaxy isn't as isolated as we thought." He activated his communicator. "Scar, patch me through to Thane and get me a full analysis of those signals." "Already done," the young dragon replied. "The transmissions are definitely artificial, definitely intelligent, and definitely from an advanced civilization. They know about the dragons, Marcus. They know about the Confederation, and they're coming." Admiral Kester's hand dropped instinctively to where her sidearm used to hang. "Invasion?" "Diplomacy," Marcus corrected, though his own voice held uncertainty. "The message includes mathematical proofs of peaceful intent and star charts showing a slow, deliberate approach that will take them 3 years to reach our galaxy." He looked out at Unity Station again, at the impossible sight of dozens of species working together in harmony. A year ago, such cooperation had been a dream. Now it was reality, and it might be the only thing standing between their galaxy and whatever was coming from Andromeda. "You know what this means," Admiral Kester said quietly. Marcus nodded. "We're not the apex predators anymore. We're not even close." He smiled, and there was something almost predatory in the expression. "We're the new kids in a much bigger neighborhood." Scared. Marcus Chen, former rebellion operative, dragon ally, architect of the Galactic Confederation, looked out at the stars and felt the same thrill he'd experienced in that crater on Pyros when 3 dragons had emerged from the caves. "Terrified," he admitted, "and absolutely fascinated." Through the viewport, Unity Station continued its slow rotation, a symbol of what different species could accomplish when they chose cooperation over conflict. In the depths of space, dragon ships maintained their patient vigil, ancient guardians watching over a galaxy in transition. And somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, signals continued to pulse through the void, carrying messages of contact and curiosity from civilizations that made even the dragons seem young. The age of humanity as a single-world species was over. The age of the Dominion had ended in transformation rather than destruction. And now the age of truly galactic civilization was beginning. Marcus Chen had started his journey as bait in a trap, thrown to monsters that were supposed to destroy him. Instead, he had become the bridge between species, the translator of intentions, the architect of peace. But as he watched the stars and waited for visitors from Andromeda, he couldn't shake the feeling that his greatest challenge still lay ahead. After all, in a universe full of monsters, the scariest ones were always the ones you hadn't met yet, and somewhere in the depths of space, something ancient and patient and infinitely curious was coming to introduce itself to the children of the Milky Way. The real adventure was just beginning, the end.